In 1963, a man in his early 60s chartered a small plane and flew over central Florida, looking down at some of the least valuable real estate in the United States. Flat, wet, featureless. Swamp and scrub forest and cattle pasture as far as the eye could travel. Nobody wanted this land. Some of the people who owned it had never even seen it. They'd inherited parcels sight unseen and couldn't find a buyer. You could purchase an acre for $100, which tells you everything you need to know about what an acre was worth. That man was Walt Disney, and within 2 years he would secretly buy 27,000 acres of this land, 43 square miles, twice the size of Manhattan, for $5 million. Today, the metropolitan area that grew around that purchase draws more than 76 million visitors a year. Not 76 million over the course of a decade, 76 million in a single year. That's more than the population of France. Orlando, Florida is now the most visited destination in the United States, and it has no harbor, no navigable river, no coastline, no mineral deposits, no mountain, no natural advantage of any kind. It sits on limestone and swamp, 42 miles from the Atlantic Ocean, 77 miles from the Gulf of Mexico. The city exists because one man looked down at worthless land from the window of a small airplane and saw something nobody else could see. But that moment didn't happen in a vacuum. It happened to a place with its own strange, stubborn history, a place that had already been built, destroyed, rebuilt, and nearly forgotten before Walt Disney ever set foot in it. The settlement that would become Orlando started the way a lot of places in Florida started, with a fort nobody remembers and a war most people have forgotten. In November 1838, the United States Army built Fort Gatlin in central Florida during the Second Seminole War, a defensible position on a hill between 3 small lakes. The fort's life was short, abandoned within a year, but the protection it had offered attracted settlers, and by 1843, a cattleman from Georgia named Aaron Jernigan had staked a claim on land 2 miles northwest. The settlement took his name, Jernigan. It was about as rough as frontier life could get. Jernigan's nearest neighbor was reportedly 20 miles away. His militia earned a reputation so bad that Secretary of War Jefferson Davis wrote that Jernigan's men were more dreadful than the Indians. By the mid-1850s, Jernigan had fallen from grace, accused of murder at the town post office, transported to Ocala for trial, then escaped, and the settlement needed a new name. At a meeting in 1857, a local figure named James Spear rose in the heat of the argument and said, roughly, that people already referred to the area as Orlando's Grave, a reference to a marker someone had found bearing the name Orlando, possibly the grave of a soldier killed in the Seminole Wars. "Let's drop the word grave," Spear said, "and let the county seat be Orlando." Here's the thing that's almost too perfect. Historians have searched military records exhaustively, and no soldier named Orlando Reeves has ever been confirmed to have existed. The city may be named for a man who never was. Spear's descendants later claimed he really named the town after the character Orlando in Shakespeare's As You Like It, and used the grave legend as convenient cover. One of downtown Orlando's main streets is named Rosalind Avenue, Rosalind being the heroine of that play. A coincidence, maybe. The point is that from its very first days, Orlando had a relationship with fiction, a name pulled from a legend, a story layered over swamp and scrub. It would not be the last time. The town was incorporated on July 31st, 1875, with 85 residents, 22 of whom were qualified voters. William Jackson Brack became the first mayor. The entire town covered 4 square miles. For a brief period in 1879, Orlando actually revoked its own charter, gave up on being a town at all, before reincorporating. Then the railroad arrived. The South Florida Railroad reached Orlando in 1880, and that connection did what railroads did everywhere in 19th century America. It turned a dot on the map into a place that mattered. Orlando became the center of Florida's citrus industry. The climate was ideal. The soil was rich. By the 1890s, orange groves stretched in every direction, and the commerce of citrus, packing, shipping, selling, defined the town's economy. 12 great packing houses lined the railroad tracks in downtown Orlando. More than half of Florida's annual citrus crop passed through the city on its way to market. This was Orlando's first golden era, a period of genuine prosperity built on something real and tangible, fruit that grew from the ground, packed in crates, loaded onto trains, and sold in markets from New York to Chicago. Hotels went up to accommodate the winter visitors who came to see the groves and enjoy the mild climate. The San Juan Hotel opened in 1885 on the corner of Orange Avenue and Central Avenue, 3 stories tall, costing $150,000. Serious money for a town that had been 85 people a decade before. Within a few years, Harry Beeman, whose family fortune came from Beeman's chewing gum, bought the San Juan and added 2 additional stories. Orlando wasn't a major city yet, but it had something: an economy that worked, a product the world wanted, and a main street where you could walk past the hotel and the courthouse and the packing houses and feel like a real American town was taking shape. It lasted 20 years. Then nature ended it in 2 nights. On December 29, 1894, a rainstorm blew through central Florida, and temperatures plunged to at least 18 degrees in Orlando. One old-timer near Frostproof in Polk County later recalled temperatures hitting 7 degrees, so cold that a small lake near his house froze solid, and the boy walked out onto the ice and earned a paddling from his terrified father. The December freeze killed the fruit on the trees. Then came the second blow. On February 7, 1895, another freeze came through, and this one killed the trees themselves. After the Great Freeze, growers in the area reported 21,737 acres planted in citrus, and not a single box produced. The December frost took the harvest. The February frost took the future. A new citrus tree takes 7 years to bear fruit, and most small growers didn't have the capital to wait that long. They sold to the few who did. The citrus barons consolidated their holdings and, significantly, moved their operations south, to the area around Lake Wales in Polk County, where the freeze hadn't hit as hard. The town of Frostproof, south of Lake Wales, did not get its name by accident. Orlando didn't die, but its first reason for existing had shifted its center of gravity 100 miles to the south, and the economic setback lasted more than a decade. What came next was something Orlando shared with the rest of Florida and much of the American South. A slow recovery, interrupted by war, then a manic boom. After the Spanish-American War, Orlando's warm winters made it a popular resort destination, and through the early 20th century, the city grew modestly. Then the 1920s arrived, and Florida lost its mind. The Florida land boom of the 1920s hit Orlando like a fever. Beginning around 1921, as one historian put it, people were swarming into Florida like locusts. The city's population, 9,282 in 1920, would double in 5 years and nearly triple by 1930. New subdivisions appeared everywhere, more than a dozen between 1924 and 1926 alone, spreading outward from the city center and converting agricultural land into residential lots. Land prices skyrocketed, and on Orange Avenue, Orlando's main commercial street, the new American art of building tall announced itself. In June 1920, a man named Joseph Fenner Ainge announced plans to build a $1 million hotel. He hired architect Murray S. King to design an 11-story tower at 37 North Orange Avenue. To make room, the Rosalind Club, a social institution on the same site, relocated to a new building on Lake Eola, and the original structure was demolished. The hotel across the street, the San Juan, Orlando's grand old establishment, built in 1885 by C.E. Pierce for $150,000, later purchased by Harry Beeman of Beeman Chewing Gum, saw the Angebilt going up and promptly began construction on an 8-story addition of its own, simply to keep pace. This was the first real skyline competition in Orlando's history. 2 hotels staring each other down across Orange Avenue, each one trying to be taller than the other. The Angebilt opened on March 14, 1923, with 250 rooms on 11 floors, a rooftop garden, a restaurant, a pharmacy, a bookstore, and Orlando's second radio station broadcasting from the mezzanine. Shortly before the opening, a crowd estimated at 10,000 gathered below the Angebilt to watch Harry Gardner, billed as the Human Fly, scale the building's exterior to raise money for charity, sponsored by New Grape Soda. He began at 7:30 in the evening and spent 90 minutes ascending and descending 11 stories, occasionally hanging from a windowsill by his fingertips. 2 months after the Angebilt opened, Joseph Ange announced bankruptcy and left the hotel. A $1 million building, the tallest in Orlando, the jewel of downtown, the place where the Human Fly had dangled from windowsills before a crowd of 10,000, and its builder walked away broke before the paint had fully cured. But the building survived. It was sold at public auction, reopened, and kept going. In January 1926, the Orlando Rayo dealership held a banquet in its dining room. The entertainment included vocal renditions of The Sweetheart of Sigma Chi and Yes, Sir, That's My Baby. The San Juan and the Angebilt stared at each other across Orange Avenue for another 52 years. 2 hotels locked in a rivalry that had outlived the boom, the bust, and the man who started it. What didn't endure was the boom itself. Hurricanes hit Florida in the late 1920s. Then came the Great Depression. Foreclosed houses and vacant subdivisions brought down banks and businesses. The 12 packing houses along the railroad tracks were a memory. The frenzy of construction paused, and Orlando, population roughly 27,000, settled into the quiet life of a modest southern county seat surrounded by what remained of its groves. World War II changed that. The Army stationed personnel at the Orlando Army Air Base and nearby Pinecastle Army Airfield. Tens of thousands of young men from the Midwest, the Northeast, the Plains states, men who had never experienced a winter without snow, spent their service years under Florida's mild skies, swimming in spring-fed lakes in January, eating oranges off the tree. When the war ended, some of them stayed. They married local women or brought sweethearts down from Ohio and Pennsylvania, settled into small houses in the new subdivision spreading out from the city center, and raised their children in a place that felt, after the gray winters of their youth, like permanent vacation. It was a pattern repeated across the Sun Belt, and it nudged Orlando's population upward. By 1950, the city proper had grown past 50,000. Then the Cold War brought something more substantial. In 1956, the aerospace and defense company Martin Marietta, later Lockheed Martin, established a manufacturing plant in Orlando, bringing with it the kind of high-paying engineering jobs that change a region's economic profile overnight. The proximity to Cape Canaveral, 50 miles to the east, made the region a natural fit for the aerospace industry. And in the years surrounding the space race, Central Florida hummed with government contracts and technical ambition. McCoy Air Force Base, just south of downtown, became home to the 306th Bombardment Wing of the Strategic Air Command, operating B-52 Stratofortress bombers and KC-135 Stratotanker aircraft. In 1958, Pinecastle Air Force Base was renamed McCoy Air Force Base, after Colonel Michael McCoy, a former wing commander killed in the crash of a B-47 bomber north of Orlando. In 1962, a portion of the base was carved off to create the Orlando Jetport, the precursor to Orlando International Airport. By 1970, 4 major airlines, Delta, National, Eastern, and Southern Airways, were running scheduled service. The Greater Orlando Chamber of Commerce produced promotional films in the late 1950s and early 1960s, touting the city's growth, its sunny disposition, its welcoming business climate. Orlando was becoming a real city, with defense contracts and an airport and a growing population. But it was still, by any national measure, a minor one. A pleasant, warm, reasonably prosperous place that most Americans had no particular reason to visit. The tallest building in town was still the Angebilt Hotel, 11 stories on Orange Avenue, the same building Joseph Ange had gone bankrupt trying to build in 1923. Then came the phone calls from California. In 1959, Walt Disney Productions began searching for a site for a second theme park. Disneyland in Anaheim had opened in 1955 and was enormously successful. But Disney had a problem. Only a small percentage of its visitors came from east of the Mississippi River, where 75% of the American population lived. He wanted a park closer to that population. He also wanted what he hadn't gotten in Anaheim: control over the surrounding land. In California, cheap motels and souvenir shops had sprung up around Disneyland's perimeter, and Disney hated the visual clutter. This time, he wanted to own everything the eye could see. In November 1963, Disney chartered a plane and flew over Central Florida. When he crossed the intersection of Interstate 4 and U.S. Route 192, he reportedly knew he'd found his spot. The location was central, connected to major highways, close to McCoy Air Force Base's joint civilian airport, and, critically, the planned construction of a major new interstate interchange with the Florida Turnpike would make it accessible from anywhere in the state. But the land itself was swamp, cattle pasture, scrub forest. It had been passed over by developers, ignored by speculators, and in many cases literally forgotten by its owners. This was exactly what Walt Disney wanted. What followed was one of the most elaborate real estate deceptions in American history. Disney set up a network of shell corporations with deliberately bland or misleading names. One was called Reedy Creek Ranch Corporation. Another was the Latin American Development and Managers Corporation. A third, in a moment of either audacity or dark humor, was named M.T. Lot, Empty Lot. He retained a Miami attorney named Paul Hellawell, who in turn used a real estate company called Florida Ranchlands, Inc. to make the actual purchases. The realtors at the Orlando firm were sworn to secrecy about their client's identity and had no idea that Walt Disney was behind the transactions. They began making offers to landowners in 1964, negotiating contracts for as little as $107 an acre. Many of the sellers were out-of-state owners who had never set foot on their land. Much of it was considered worthless swampland, and they were happy to take whatever cash was offered. The first major purchase was recorded on May 3, 1965. 8,380 acres of swamp, bought from Florida State Senator Earlo Bronson in a deal struck 7 months earlier for approximately $120 an acre. The Orlando Sentinel ran a story the next day, but the speculation was that the land might be for the space program. Nobody guessed Disney. To keep the secret, Disney delayed recording deeds, made purchases in cash to avoid paper trails, and personally denied any interest in Florida when reporters asked. A grocery store clerk told the Sentinel that strange men from California kept coming to get sodas from him. A waitress recognized Walt at a local restaurant, and he waved it off as a trip down memory lane. The publisher of the Orlando Sentinel, Martin Anderson, may have learned the truth early on, but kept it out of the paper, either because he didn't fully believe it or because he understood the economic bonanza that would follow and didn't want to spoil it. Either way, the secret held. It didn't hold forever. Emily Bavar, a reporter and editor for the Sentinel's Florida magazine, had grown suspicious. She flew to Disneyland, interviewed Walt Disney himself, and asked him point blank if he was buying up land in Central Florida. He didn't say yes. He didn't exactly say no. On October 21, 1965, Bavar ran a story predicting that Disney was behind the purchases. 3 days later, the magazine went further and declared it outright. Disney had planned to make his announcement on November 15th, but Bavar forced his hand. The final numbers? 27,400 acres purchased from 51 landowners for just over $5 million. The average price per acre, when all the deals were done, came to $182. Disney's first acre had cost $80. His last, after the secret was out and prices had surged more than 1,000%, cost $80,000. That spread, $80 to $80,000, is a one-sentence summary of what happens when the most famous entertainment company in the world turns its attention to your backyard. On November 15, 1965, in a press conference in downtown Orlando, Walt and Roy Disney, alongside Florida Governor Hayden Burns and a crowd of executives and officials, formally announced the Florida Project. The land they had bought was 43 square miles. It was twice the size of Manhattan, and they intended to build not just a theme park, but an entire world. Resorts, transportation systems, golf courses, and, most ambitiously, what Walt called the Experimental Prototype Community of Tomorrow, or EPCOT, a real, functioning, futuristic city where 20,000 people would live and work, serving as a permanent showcase for American industry and innovation. It was the most audacious private development project anyone had ever proposed in the United States. But Disney needed something even more extraordinary than the land itself. He needed freedom from local government. In Anaheim, he'd clashed with the city over building codes, zoning, and the cluttered development around Disneyland. This time, he wanted his own jurisdiction, and in the fall of 1966, he got to work persuading the Florida legislature to give it to him. On October 27, 1966, 2 months before his death, Walt Disney sat in front of a camera and recorded a 25-minute film explaining his vision for the Florida Project. He described EPCOT in detail, the transportation systems, the residential areas, the climate-controlled downtown. The film was screened for Florida legislators in February 1967. Walt Disney, by then, had been dead for 2 months. He passed away on December 15, 1966, from complications of lung cancer. He never set foot in a single building on the Florida property. He never saw the land cleared or the first foundation poured. The most transformative figure in Orlando's history never experienced the city he would create. But the project continued. Roy Disney, Walt's older brother, came out of planned retirement to see it through. On May 12, 1967, Governor Claude R. Kirk, Jr. signed the Reedy Creek Improvement Act into law, creating the Reedy Creek Improvement District, a special governmental jurisdiction covering Disney's entire property. The district had the same authority as a county government. It could build its own roads, run its own utilities, manage its own waste, operate its own fire department, set its own building codes, and levy its own taxes. Disney would govern itself. No American corporation had ever been granted anything like it. The legislature also incorporated 2 cities within the district, Bay Lake and Reedy Creek, later renamed Lake Buena Vista, whose only residents would be Disney employees living on company-owned land. The Board of Supervisors would be elected by landowners within the district, and since Disney owned virtually all the land, the company would elect its own government. It was, in effect, a private government, created at the request of a corporation, signed into law by a state governor, and designed to ensure that no city council, no county commission, no local zoning board could stand between Disney and its vision. The deal cut both ways. Disney would pay for its own infrastructure, its own services, its own roads, and Orange and Osceola County taxpayers would never foot the bill. But the scope of autonomy was breathtaking. Nothing like it had existed before, and the arrangement would endure, virtually unchanged, for more than 50 years. Groundbreaking followed on May 30th, 1967. 9,000 construction workers descended on the swamp. The construction cost was approximately $400 million. In 1971 money, call it close to $3 billion, adjusted for inflation. To put that in perspective, Disneyland in Anaheim had cost $17 million. The Florida project was more than 20 times as expensive, and the scale was almost incomprehensible. Workers moved millions of cubic yards of earth, drained wetlands, dug canals, and built a network of underground utility tunnels, utilidors, beneath the Magic Kingdom so that costumed employees could move unseen between themed areas, emerging like actors through hidden doors to maintain the illusion that they'd simply always been there. The Magic Kingdom itself was built on the second story. The ground floor was the utilidor level, raised above the swamp and buried beneath landscaping and fill. Disney set aside 7,500 acres as a permanent conservation area, never to be developed. The ecological balance of Central Florida's fragile water table depended on it. Even in building a fantasy, they had to respect the swamp. On the morning of October 1st, 1971, the gates of the Magic Kingdom opened. The Florida Highway Patrol had warned that as many as 300,000 people might try to visit on the first day. In reality, the crowd was modest, 10,422 visitors by the Orlando Sentinel's count. The park had deliberately chosen a weekday in the off-season for its opening. Admission cost $3.50 for adults, and the park used a ticket book system. A through E tickets for different tiers of rides sold in books for under $6. There were 26 attractions spread across 6 themed zones. 5,000 cast members were on hand, a guest-to-employee ratio of about 2 to 1. Roy Disney stood on a dais on Main Street, USA, beside an actor in a Mickey Mouse costume, and gave a speech honoring his late brother. The name, he told the crowd, would be Walt Disney World. Everyone has heard of Ford cars, he said, but not everyone knows it was Chairman Henry Ford who started it all. I want people to know that this was Walt's dream. Some of the first visitors had slept in their cars at a nearby rest stop the night before, circling the toll plaza in the darkness until it opened at dawn. The first family through the gate, a couple and their 2 blonde sons, received a golden key granting them free admission for life. The grand opening celebration came 3 weeks later, from October 23rd to 25th, when celebrities including Bob Hope, Julie Andrews, and Annette Funicello descended on Orlando, and television cameras broadcast the spectacle to millions. By the end of 1971, 400,000 people had visited. Roy Disney died on December 20th, 1971, just 3 months after the park opened. He was 78. He had lived precisely long enough to see his brother's vision open its doors, and not a day longer. Both Disneys, the dreamer and the builder, were gone within 5 years of each other, and neither lived to see what their project would become. What it became was a city. Not Orlando the city. Orlando the city was already there with its Angebilt Hotel and its Orange Avenue and its bungalow neighborhoods from the 1920s boom. What Disney World created was something else, a gravitational field. In 1970, Orange County's population was about 344,000. By 1999, it had more than doubled, surpassing 846,000. People moved to the area in overwhelming numbers, hoping to find work at Disney World. Hotels, restaurants, gas stations, and souvenir shops spread outward along International Drive and US 192. SeaWorld opened in 1973. Universal Studios Florida opened in 1990. The Orange County Convention Center, expanded to more than 2 million square feet in 2004, became the second largest convention facility in the United States. The defense industry remained. Lockheed Martin still manufactures missile systems in the area. And a technology sector grew up around the University of Central Florida and the Central Florida Research Park, the 7th largest research park in the country. But tourism was the engine. Tourism and the peculiar economic gravity of a place where fantasy was the primary product. Consider what this growth looked like on the ground. In the 1980s, freezes devastated what remained of Central Florida's citrus industry, and the groves that had defined Orlando's landscape for a century were plowed under for subdivisions and hotel complexes. Orange groves that had survived the Great Freeze of 1895, that had been replanted and tended for decades, that had perfumed entire neighborhoods with blossom in the spring, gone, replaced by stucco and asphalt. The very thing the city had once been built on vanished beneath the thing it was becoming. The numbers are staggering in a way that's hard to internalize. In its first 3 months, Walt Disney World welcomed about 400,000 visitors. In 2025, the greater Orlando area welcomed 76.7 million, the highest total in the destination's history, and once again, the most of any destination in the United States. That's not just theme park visitors. That's conventions, business travel, sporting events, and the vast ecosystem of hospitality that sustains and feeds on all of them. Tourism generates $93 billion in annual economic impact for the region, $5.6 billion in local and state tax revenue. Disney alone employs roughly 80,000 cast members in Central Florida, with an annual payroll exceeding $2 billion. The Orlando International Airport, built from the bones of McCoy Air Force Base, still carrying the old military airport code MCO, is the 7th busiest airport in the United States and the 18th busiest in the world. What happened to the old city, the one that was already there? Pieces of it remain. The Angebilt Hotel still stands at 37 North Orange Avenue, 11 stories, its lobby photos showing a crowd gathered below in 1923 to watch the human fly. Its offices now, with bars and retail on the ground floor. The San Juan Hotel, its great rival across the street, the one built in 1885, expanded by Beeman of chewing gum fame, expanded again in the 20s to keep up with the Angebilt, was demolished in the 1980s. The site where the San Juan stood is a few blocks from the Dr. Phillips Center for the Performing Arts, opened in 2014, a $330 million facility that hosts Broadway tours and the Orlando Philharmonic. The neighborhoods around Lake Eola, where the Rosalind Club once stood before Joseph Ange knocked it down to build his doomed hotel, are now among the most desirable addresses in downtown Orlando, filled with high-rise condominiums and the kind of coffee shops and bistros that signal a neighborhood has been discovered. Lake Eola itself has a memorial beside it, placed by students of Cherokee Junior School in 1939, marking the spot where the city's supposed namesake fell. A man named Orlando, who may never have existed, memorialized beside a lake in a city named for a legend. There is something fitting about that. Orlando has always been a story about invention, about things willed into being from nothing. Aaron Jernigan willed a settlement out of swampland. The citrus barons willed an agricultural economy out of sandy soil. The 1920s boomers willed a skyline out of ambition and easy credit. And Walt Disney, flying over the intersection of I-4 and Route 192 in a small plane, willed something else entirely. A city conjured not from industry or geography or natural resources, but from imagination, from the deliberate corporate manufacture of wonder. The 1920s bungalows still stand in the neighborhoods near downtown. College Park, Thornton Park, the streets around Lake Ivanhoe, named for the Walter Scott novel. Century-old oaks line brick streets. These are the houses that were built during the boom, the one that came before the hurricanes and the Depression ended it. They survived because they were small and sturdy, and because nobody considered them valuable enough to tear down. They coexist, a few miles away, with a 47-square-mile entertainment complex that generates $20 million a day. The metro area's population is now approaching 3 million. The city itself, its borders drawn in a patchwork checkerboard with pockets of unincorporated county surrounded by city limits, holds about 340,000 people. This is modest compared to the metro, and it's part of what makes Orlando unusual. The city proper is a fraction of the sprawl that bears its name. The sprawl is the thing. International Drive, 11 miles of hotels, restaurants, and attractions, functions as a kind of Las Vegas Strip for families. Icon Park, the Convention Center, SeaWorld, Universal, the endless parade of chain restaurants and souvenir outlets. It exists because of Disney World, which itself exists because a man flew over swamp in 1963. Eatonville, 10 miles north of downtown, was incorporated in 1887 as the first town in the United States incorporated by African Americans. It predates Disney World by 84 years. The novelist and anthropologist Zora Neale Hurston grew up there. Today, Eatonville sits in the middle of the metro area, surrounded by the same growth that surrounds everything else, a historically black town hemmed in by the commercial machinery of tourism. The Backstreet Boys formed in Orlando. So did NSYNC. So did the death metal band Death. Rolling Stone once called the city the Seattle of Electronica. These facts coexist without contradiction because Orlando has always been many things layered on top of each other. Citrus town, military outpost, defense hub, theme park capital, each layer partially burying the one before it. What is the story then? It's not a story of decline the way the story of so many American cities runs. Orlando didn't peak and fall. It kept rising, though what it was rising toward kept changing, and each new version of the city was less connected to the land it sat on. The citrus industry, at least, grew from the soil. The defense industry drew on proximity to Cape Canaveral. But the tourism economy that now defines Orlando has almost nothing to do with the physical place. The theme parks could theoretically have been built anywhere with flat land and warm weather. The fact that they're here, the fact that 76 million people a year come to a patch of former swamp with no coastline and no mountains and no natural scenery to speak of, is the result of one man's choice, made from the window of an airplane, executed through a web of shell companies, and sealed with a piece of legislation that gave a corporation its own government. That's what makes Orlando's rise impossible. Not that a small city grew large. Lots of American cities did that. Not that tourism became its economic engine. Las Vegas runs on the same fuel. What makes it impossible is the sheer improbability of the place itself. There is nothing here. There was never anything here. The land was so valueless that a sitting state senator sold 8,000 acres of it for $120 an acre and thought he'd gotten a fair deal. And now the region generates $93 billion a year in economic impact, and more people visit it annually than visit any other destination in the most visited country in the world. Walk through downtown Orlando today, past the Angebilt's ground floor bars, past the site where the San Juan once stood, past Lake Eola and its memorial to a man who never existed, and you're walking through a city that has been invented and reinvented so many times that invention is the only constant. The bungalows of the 20s, the air bases of the 40s, the missile plants of the 50s, the swamp deal of the 60s, the castle that rose from the drained marsh in 1971, each one improbable, each one built on top of the last. The land itself, flat, wet, unremarkable, the kind of ground you'd fly over without looking down, just sat there through all of it, holding up whatever someone decided to put on it next. Walt Disney's first acre cost $80. His last cost $80,000. That land is still there, underneath all of it, the monorails and the utilidors and the 76 million visitors and the $93 billion. Still flat, still wet, still underneath everything, swamp.